Thank you. So we'll go ahead and get started, and we might have some people pop in as time goes on. But first of all, thank you all for coming and participating in this Innovative Minds lecture series that we do through the Women in Science Network. Just as a little background for the Innovative Minds, really it's kind of progression of what was happening in the Women in Science Network with the annual symposium. And we really just wanted to expand on that and give space for innovative, both women and men and all genders, and just give us a spot or a place where we can show some of those things that are happening within our community that are innovative and really bringing ideas to the community of science and STEAM. And one of the things that we've done lately is we've had some films that we've been showing, like Picture a Scientist, and our plan is to kind of keep on with a film festival throughout the year of 2022, 2023. And we also have some upcoming lecture series, so you'll have to definitely tune in for those or keep an eye out for those. And then as a save the date, just for the Women in Science Network in general, April 21st is our annual symposium, and it will be all virtual this year, just hopefully just this last time. And it's all about resilience and how there's been a lot of good things that have actually happened through the pandemic and the resilience of it all. And so we'll have that be our focus for that symposium. But to get on for today, so I am the moderator for today's panel. My name is Julie Moreno, and I'm an assistant professor in the Environmental and Radiological Health Sciences Department here at CSU. And I'm an aspiring Green Lab certificate holder for my research lab. So we're in the process of trying to get this done. So this is something that I think is really cool. And I'm hoping that today you'll really learn a lot about what is the Green Labs program, and really their model of where research sustainability meets safety, and how important that really is for science as a whole, and how that can really help even the science that comes out of labs through this program be even better. And so that's, I think, really exciting for researchers for sure. And so I thought we would just start today with some quick introductions, and then from our panelists, and then we'll go into each of their roles and their stories and how they got involved with the Green Labs program here at CSU. So we can just start on my screen if you want to unmute, Tracy, and kind of just your easy introduction, and then we'll get to your story in a minute.
Yeah, my name is Tracy Webb, and I am a research scientist here at CSU, as well as a clinical review board specialist. So I do a lot of stuff in research.
Stacey. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name is Stacey Baumgarn. I'm the campus energy coordinator. I work in facilities management, and I'm your Green Labs champion.
Awesome. How about Anthony?
Hi, everyone. My name is Anthony Appleton. I'm a research safety culture coordinator out of the Office for Vice President of Research, who's always happy to help you with any of your research needs.
And Colleen?
Hey, everybody. I'm Colleen Duncan, and I'm a faculty member and veterinarian in the Department of MIP, College of Vet Med.
Awesome. So we thought we would kind of take this idea and really start with Tracy Webb's story and how the Green Lab program really kind of started at CSU.
I thought I would start by explaining that I was an embarrassment to my family, who, when I was very young and lived in Hawaii, I used to actually, most people are like sunbathing on the beach and having fun. And I'm walking around collecting cans out of trash cans because I was kind of overwhelmed with the amount of trash on beaches. This is a long time ago. So it's not unusual that I would be very interested in finding ways for us to be more sustainable. And I've been doing research for a long time, but I would say I probably got most interested in what we could do after I finished my PhD and was more managing and running experiments and doing a lot of cell culture when you become overwhelmed with the number of pipette tips and trash that you end up generating. And I think the more you pay attention, like I said, when I became more involved in all of the processes, the more I really wanted to find out a way that we could do something about that. And then wonderfully got to work with Colleen and some students who were also very interested. And then Stacey finding out about the My Green Labs program and really got very interested in seeing how we could implement that here at CSU. And so my lab kind of decided to be the first guinea pig to try out the process, which I found to be incredibly eye-opening. And if anybody's interested, even if this is a new thing for you, I would say that the program, if nothing else, like opens your eyes to things that you can do. And maybe it wasn't, I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I want to be able to recycle all my gloves and I want to be able to do all of it. You may find out that those things you can't necessarily immediately do, but there are so many other things that you're able to change and improve in the research process. And even just thinking about other things that you're doing in life in general. They have a category on travel, which always hits me. And I'm like, oh. That was maybe one I didn't get 100% on when we took you end up doing like a test of your lab where you take a survey on all these different areas. And I wanted to be able to write an explanation that I live in Colorado, so biking in the winter is hard, and things like that. But anyway, I think the process is really fascinating, and I'm happy to go into more. I don't know, Julie, if you wanted me to expand on that whole process now or wait.
I think that's great. Why don't we move to Colleen and her role in all of this program?
Yeah, so like Tracy mentioned, I also came from a background where I was interested in sustainability, even from sort of early education. I'm a veterinarian now, and I actually worked for, starting early 2000s in the diagnostic lab. So I had been working in a sort of veterinary laboratory environment, but I think on my own, I had a hard time imagining how I could move the needle. And really the inspiration for me in this space, as with almost every project, is actually driven by students. And so the connection with Tracy related to a course that we run in the veterinary program. It's an elective course on emerging issues. And the last few years, I've just really noticed this shift in students wanting to work on applied projects related to sustainability. So there were a number of students in that class that specifically were interested in reducing the footprint, the environmental footprint of laboratory research within the biomedical space. And so that's how this partnership with Tracy really started, to do a real project, an applied project, to see what it takes to move the needle on sustainability within a lab here on campus. And so that kind of brought together Tracy and Stacey and I've continued in that space, largely working with students who I think have the best ideas and are really driving a lot of this initiative forward.
Awesome. I agree with you. Students always have the best ideas for sure. Stacey, would you like to give us a little background on your role in the program?
Sure. So I mentioned that I'm the campus energy coordinator working in facilities management. And my day job then is really about energy, water, and resource conservation, with an eye towards, always with an eye towards how do we reduce our impact and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions at the university. And when we look across all of the buildings and all of the activities of the university, you kind of start to look at, where does all the energy go? Where does all the water go? And the majority of that consumption happens in our buildings, and more specifically in our lab buildings. And so just a guy working in facilities, and I'm thinking, how do I make a connection to the folks that are working in the lab that might have some opportunities to help us with that resource conservation goal or task? And so I started looking around, and I found different programs and things out there like I2SL, which is the International Institute for Sustainable Laboratories. I got myself involved with I2SL just to try to start learning more about lab spaces and places. And then I just started talking to people. I was just talking to people and trying to meet people. And interestingly, the first Green Labs champion that I would say I worked with was a graduate student who I met at a meeting at the city of Fort Collins talking about the city's climate action plan. I just went to this public meeting. I sit down, I make friendly conversation with the person sitting next to me. It's a graduate student at CSU working in a lab in plant science. It's Molly McLaughlin. Molly becomes really the first Green Lab champion, just doing it one-on-one. We just talked about things that we could do. Neither one of us really knew exactly how to do it, but we just talked about the things that we could do. And Molly started by having those conversations with folks in her lab and talking about what equipment can we turn off when we're not using it? How can we make a little sign to put on this thing? And basically by just creating those conversations within the lab, though she didn't go through a Green Lab certification program, they really introduced and started to implement Green Lab's best practices in their lab. And it was just super cool because they just did it amongst themselves. And I think that's such a wonderful way to get started. And that was in 2015. And so we'd been kind of going along, and I started some other programs that I think we'll probably maybe talk about as it comes along. But the one I'll mention just right now is creating an incentive for ultra low temperature freezers, right? I just was looking at what are those pieces of equipment in the labs that use a lot of energy, a lot of electricity, and what can we do to become a partner from facilities with folks in the lab to help reduce electricity consumption. And one of those things became that target on ultra low temperature freezers. So that was a program that was the first real program that I started, and that was also in 2015. And today we've incentivized the purchase of over 100 ultra low temperature freezers. And just so you know, anybody who doesn't know this that's on the call, if you have an ultra low temperature freezer, one freezer can use as much electricity as an average household does in a year. So it's not insignificant. And of course, that's an old one. If you have an older one or a less efficient one, and the models, new models, energy efficient models, use about 1/3 of that amount of electricity. So it's still a lot. But if you can cut your electricity consumption by 2/3 from just one piece of equipment, it's a big deal. So it's exciting to be a part of that. So that's how I got involved, is trying to be a partner and someone who can help, and serve as a resource, but also helping our folks on campus in the lab know how they can contribute to energy, water, and resource conservation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stacey. Anthony, would you like to share a little bit too?
Yeah, I really got to tip my hat to Stacey, because without Stacey, none of this is possible. So just, let's make this all very clear that Stacey was behind this and, was doing it when it was really, really hard and there might not have been much support. And now we see the intersectionality of sustainability and safety. And when I first got here to CSU, my title having the word culture in it, I had to go figure out what is CSU's culture. And one of the mainstays of our culture is actually sustainability, interwoven through so much of our identity. And when we ask students, what brought you to CSU, a box that gets checked more often than not is, it's the Green University. I wanted to do applied projects in sustainability. So what Tracy and Stacey and Colleen are saying about our students, we see in, on paper when they tell us, and we see it in their actions. So it's really important to note who those drivers are between Stacey and our students. And when we think about safety, it turns out that these two are mutually beneficial in a symbiotic way. And so Stacey had all this great stuff, and we merged these two web pages so that if you're seeking out safety, you'll also end up on a safety webpage. And if you're seeking out sustainability, you end up on a safety webpage. And so that, with one, you find the other. And then that makes it very helpful. And students, are like, well, what does safety, have to do with sustainability? And Stacey will tell about a project later called Shut the Sash, where that is a 100% correlation between safety and sustainability. And, we'll sometimes hear from some of our researchers, well, we don't want things to slow us down or get in our way. And what we found is that if we go down the path of sustainability and there's the bandwidth in the lab to do it, they end up doing better research, safer research. And a great way to think about this is using statistics to be more sustainable. And so one of the ways that we can do research is we can say, well, we use so much of X, how much do we really need to use? Whether that is an animal model or that's a hazardous material, what is a statistically significant amount so that we get good data that's publishable? Well, in doing that, we end up in a more sustainable process because you will use what you need, no more. And so reducing excess is also a wonderful way to think about doing research more sustainably. And so the other part of this is that using sustainability helps us to drive our land grant mission. And so when we think about like a 30,000 foot view and say, okay, what are our responsibilities to our community? What are our responsibilities to Colorado? And our responsibility is to conduct ourselves in a way that does not hurt our community. And so when we do things more sustainably, we inevitably are helping, our community around us or other communities that we might impact around the world by trying to be more sustainable. And so, CSU is not lip service to this. I'm so impressed. A lot of universities, like, here's an office and here's all this great verbiage. At CSU, you will find people who do this, and they do it in their everyday research. They do it in how they travel to campus. They do it in housing and dining services. This is really through and through in our culture, and I'm very proud and happy to have Stacey, support all of this because, when you try to tell other executives about this, you have to be able to sell it. And Stacey knows how to sell it, man. Those numbers about this is how much a house energy takes, and you look at hoods, whether they're biological or chemical, and just moving a sash a little bit can do a lot. And so when we think about all the great research we do, we hit a milestone, right? Almost $450 million in research expenditures. As we grow, the scale of our ability to be more sustainable grows with it. And so the impact of this is also going to grow with the scale of that research. And so it's better to start now and then propagate it. And when our students talk to our students, our PIs talk to our PIs, we really grow this program. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you, Anthony. I love how you said that the students don't understand the connection to the safety. And I really don't know if even the PIs and the researchers all know either. So I think that it's important that we do these kind of discussions and really think about things in that way. Just as a researcher myself, I feel we don't always think about the safety side being a sustainability side. We do have a question in the chat that kind of falls really well with your discussion. Is there a tool to help you determine how much energy, water, et cetera, that we use on a daily basis, maybe within our, floor in our building or our lab specifically?
Are you looking at me?
Sure.
Well, I don't know that I would say, well, there are some tools, but there's also some different reference materials and resources that other Green Labs programs have put together that kind of list the average amount of energy that different types of pieces of equipment use. And so, I think it would be a matter of looking at your lab and looking at the types of things that you use or the different processes you use, and see it, you might already have a sense of what you use the most, or what might be the largest energy consuming device in the room. And of course, it's always really important. I want to I want you to know that I know doing your research is the most important thing, right? So we don't want to get in the way of that. But are there pieces of equipment that you can turn off at night? That's a great little place to start. We may or may not be able to change the number of air changes that are happening in your lab. That is certainly probably the largest energy consuming aspect of your lab, is the number of air changes per hour. And yet that is established and dictated by environmental health and safety, and by the types of chemicals that are present in your lab. And so that is absolutely a health and safety issue, which it might just be the reality of what your lab is. And that's okay. That's what you do. And so that's why we want to look around and then find those other things that we might be able to do that would help us dial back on some of that energy consumption. So I guess I'd say on our magic website, there's a little button you can click that would invite Anthony and I to come and visit your lab. And we could just, do a simple, it's a casual, simple, it's not a judgment, it's not, it's just walk through, see what questions you have, and see what we can see, and where we might talk together and find some of those ways of, hey, here might be an opportunity for reducing our water consumption, or here might be an opportunity for reducing our energy consumption. And it's really specific lab by lab, but if you have a specific question about a specific piece of equipment, I bet we can find out the answer.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Stacey. Kind of to kind of keep going on that kind of topic, what do you have like an estimate of how many people are interested in the Green Labs program and that you've maybe done those walkthroughs with on campus?
Sorry, was that me again?
Yeah, sorry. Or Anthony might know the answer better. I don't know.
Well, to be honest, when did you start here, Anthony? January of 2019, something like that?
Yeah, 2019, January.
So we had about 1 year where Anthony and I were kind of just getting to know each other, and maybe we didn't even get a website until the end of that year, or I can't really remember when we got the website launched. But point is, probably about the time we got the website launched, this delightful global pandemic started, and while research in many cases, increased, casual visits with friends did not increase. And so we have not done a lot of those face-to-face assessments yet, but I think it's a huge and wonderful opportunity. So I'll just take a second to talk about the other programs that are going on. And so Anthony mentioned Shut the Sash. Shut the Sash is a program we just started in the last year, buying some, where we have some stickers that if we can come to your lab, we can help install these little stickers on, hey, Anthony, look at that, visuals. We can install this on the side of your fume hood that just serves as a visual reminder to lower the sash when you're not working in the hood, right? Because if you lower the sash in general, you'll always be safer. And the likelihood, depending upon the type of fume hood you have, it will reduce the amount of energy consumption of that hood. So there are 800 fume hoods on campus, something like that, 700-800 of them. And I believe
we have over 900 now.
Okay, so hundreds, and we've put a sticker on less than 20 so far. Right. So help us use up our stickers. But I mentioned our ultra low temperature freezer incentive program. Again, over 100 freezers have been purchased since 2015 with that program. And that's probably about 80 different PIs. Some people come back and buy a second freezer or replace another older ailing freezer. But that's probably been the most successful so far. Of course, in that context, I'm giving you money, so people like that, and that works out nicely. With the Green Lab, my Green Lab certification program, right? This is where you can get your lab certified as a green lab. That's what Tracy did. Tracy was the first lab at CSU to earn that Green Lab certification. And we currently have 11 other labs going through kind of a pilot phase 2. That's what Julie mentioned she's a part of in her lab. And there's another lab on campus at the Diagnostic Medicine Center that has started the process on their own, which is completely fantastic. And I'm really excited about. So I don't know off the top of my head how many people across all those labs are involved, but it's safe to say that those first 12 labs are underway and pursuing certification. So
Stacey,
I think we're slowly building, but it's a couple hundred people probably already.
That's awesome. There is a question that kind of goes along with what we were talking about. What are some numbers or statistics of the impact reduction with implementing the Green Lab program? And maybe not here at CSU, but at other universities or other institutions that have kind of implemented stuff like this. Do you know?
The Green Labs actually have some data on this, and I'll let Stacey add to it, but they, have, like he said, they kind of have general ideas of, like, one of them they have is, if you have a piece of lab equipment that's left on 24/7, and we all know lots of lab equipment is left on 24/7. If you could turn off this is one of their statistics, one piece of equipment, it's equivalent to taking 10,000 cars off the road. So, and that's one statistic that they have. And, if you could actually cut what they call plug load, so, how much energy is being used by 10% in your lab, that's the equivalent of taking 550,000 cars off the road.
That is incredible.
Yeah, and they have more, but that's just one example. I thought I'd let Stacey, he probably has even more data than I know.
Yeah, no, Tracy, thanks. It's really, so Tracy's right. Like, when you go through, if you want your lab to go through the Green Lab certification program, as Tracy mentioned, you take that initial assessment. That's a way to kind of, for everybody in the lab to talk about what they understand about the sustainability practices in the lab. And again, it's not really a judgment or an evaluation. It's just a baseline assessment to find out, what are the practices and behaviors in the lab and who knows what. And so this can be a really interesting tool because it helps start that conversation and ask a bunch of those unique questions. Then maybe if you're the PI like Tracy or like Julie, then you have the opportunity to work on some of those areas, if you would like, based on that survey feedback, and help work on improving some of those different practices and behaviors in the lab of things that are appropriate and specific to your lab. And then after a period of what you might say implementation or conversation, that's when you take a second follow-up assessment and earn the certification. And so again, while there are some numbers that might be relative to, if every lab across the country did this thing, here would be our impact. It's really important to just remember that what you do in your lab matters, whether that's large or small, and how many people can actually participate in it. I do want to mention real quick one other quick thing, and that is this last year we had the Green Labs program won a little grant of money from the President's Sustainability Commission, and we hired some graduate students who made some fantastic, amazing infographics that had some of these statistics and examples of kind of like know your impact. Again, not a judgment, just kind of a hold up the mirror and look and see what's going on. So maybe they can help us ask ourselves, is there a way I can help to minimize that impact? So we don't have those posted on the website yet, but we should soon, I guess. And then that'll be a way where if you just want to help hang up this infographic in your lab or in the hallway, or email it to some colleagues, we hope that those tools will be some of the ways that we can share and start those conversations.
Great. I look forward to seeing those infographics for sure.
Yeah, and if I could give an example, we were talking about shut the sash, and I used to do research, and a lot of it was heavy using chemical fume hoods. And if you walked away from your hood, you just shut it. And I didn't understand at the time that by just shutting the hood, the energy draw that the hood is using is significantly less. Okay, but when you shut the hood, that is actually a blast shield and a chemical resistant shield. And there was an explosion in a lab one time when researchers walked away, and no one got hurt in the lab because the sash was all the way down. And what happened upon investigation was a researcher thought they turned off a hot plate to 0, and they turned the hot plate to 10 and went to lunch. But because the hood was down, we're 100% safe, and we're using as little energy as possible. And that's one of my favorite fume hood examples.
Yes, that's powerful, right? Also, I love how you just brought that up, the safety side of things again, because I think that's really important, right? Like, we all are in labs and we want to be safe, and we want our people to be safe within the lab. And I love this idea that it is also helping the sustainability. But one of the things I know before when we were meeting about the panel, we talked about also well-being of just people in general that are within the lab. Can we maybe take a few minutes and talk about that? Because I think that's just so important right now for our researchers, and their well-being is just as important as anything else, I think.
Yeah, and I'll maybe start, Julie, if that's okay.
Yeah,
I think
for
I
sure.
tried to emphasize this, and I don't always communicate as clearly as I want probably, but that for me, I love doing research, but it actually is challenging when I feel like I'm creating a lot of waste while trying to come up with new solutions or treatments or ideas. And so there's, for me, definitely as a person, a wellness component to it of you see, okay, to try to do this great thing, I've created 5 bags of trash, or I've had all of this equipment on in the lab for how long? And so even making small efforts, getting involved in this project with the students who were obviously super passionate about it too, we all could feel so much better that we were making an effort, even if it was just trying something. And it's made a huge difference. Even like I said, maybe I wasn't able to change things immediately that I wanted that were super obvious. There's a ton of other things that you're able to do that you didn't know. So that education piece, I think, also helps, where you're working together. And then I'll add, joining with this amazing group of people and the students that we worked with, and then the community that's created once you start reaching out and learning about other people who are interested in this. My Green Labs, if you become an ambassador, they have like a whole Teams group, and people come up with great ideas and questions. And it really then helps too to make you feel better that look at all of these great people who also care about this, when maybe you were sitting alone in the lab thinking, oh my God, I don't want to give up finding good answers, but how do I do that? It really, I think, helps all of us feel much better about what we're doing. Like I said, on a personal level, it definitely has in all those ways. One, feeling like I'm making a difference, and then being able to work with other passionate, wonderful people who also care about these issues.
And it seems like CSU, with their sustainability impact being such an important part of our university in the first place, this idea, and Colleen can maybe talk a little more about the student aspect of things, but this idea of like recruiting and retaining good students that want this to be part of their well-being and their safety and their sustainability.
Yeah, for sure. I think that this is true across so many different levels, right? So Tracy's story is an example of how individuals can experience sort of this intersection, or, their personal well-being. They want to be great scientists, but they also don't want their work to have a detriment. And I think for those of us in the health sciences specifically, this is so ironic, right? Because a lot of these issues around sustainability have extremely clear human and animal health consequences, right? The amount of water we use, or the amount of how we're getting our power, for example, and the waste that we generate, right? And so I think, but there is also, like, it spans the spectrum, right? And if you look at like the World Happiness Report, right? That's where there's a lot of data about sort of at the national level, the correlation between sustainability of particular countries and individual citizen well-being. So there's sort of on the individual level all the way up to the macro level, there's a well understood relationship between well-being and sustainability. From the student standpoint, I would say this is a really interesting space too, because younger people in general tend to have really grown up aware of climate change and sustainability, which is, quite frankly, not the norm of the demographic of a lot of PIs, right? It just wasn't something that they learned in school, but it is something that our students know about, are learning about in elementary school, right? And they come seeking, or they're just assuming that we are going to educate and mentor and guide them to be the best, whatever they are studying to be, in a sustainable way. Like, that to them is just logical. It's sort of a no-brainer. And so I think, again, it kind of comes back to the students really driving a lot of these initiatives. I think CSU has a lot of data on the importance of sustainability and why people are literally choosing this university to come to. And because this is a topic that really transcends discipline, like on this call, we're talking about people who do physical laboratory research, but there are so many different disciplines that can come together and move the needle on this. So I think, again, this is really being driven by the people who are going to inherit the problems of the waste and energy, that we're using or have used in our scientific and our research labs for years. So, and on that level, I think you'd have to ask the students, but I think that they do see that intersection between, at their personal level, between sustainability and well-being, but also in the types of careers and the way that they want to work and the way that they will be PIs and run companies and stuff in the future, right? So learning by doing, not by having somebody tell you this in a classroom. So actually modeling best practices is, I think, from an educational standpoint, the most important piece, right? We don't just stand there in an auditorium and, chemistry and biology in these huge classes and say, and yes, you should consider sustainability, if we're not modeling it on our labs too. So I think that is, being the type of scientist that you want, moving on. You have to practice those skills here at a university. And I think that's a really important part for modeling this behavior in our labs at an academic institution.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important. And I think you're right. The next generation of scientists are the ones that are really, if they can learn these skills early on from PIs, that will be, we might be able to change things, right? These 11 labs that are doing the system now will eventually can grow, I think, a lot if we're able to educate our students in that way.
I think also, Julie, just to add, we can empower them to question things that maybe we don't even think to look at, because you're creating an environment where they can say, hey, do we really have to do that way? Or is there another way that we can do this? And, like you and I probably, there's things you were taught as you were learning research that you keep doing because that's what worked. Mm-hmm. And you get these new, fresh, passionate people who are like, wait, but do we have to? You're like, oh my God, that's a great idea. Let's look into that. And so that's another way that I think we can help, just by having these conversations and allowing open dialogue for people to come up with new ideas.
Definitely. So we have a question in the chat. I'll kind of one's just a little bit of a comment and then a question. It says, it's awesome to learn how the program is growing at CSU, starting with Dr. Webb's lab and now growing to multiple labs across the campus. What do you think the biggest hurdle is in making Green Labs the norm and not something to opt into? Or rather, what would it take for Green Labs to become a requirement for the operations of research labs? It's a good question.
So I think it's already a requirement we impose on ourselves. And when you look at how we build buildings now, there are some incredibly well-built buildings but we also have some very old buildings that we can't do too much about. And I'm sure Stacey would love to talk about deferred maintenance and how that could help the greenness of some of our research. And I think Danny's question is right on. You know, another thing we can look at is our value system, and PIs have a very interesting value system called tenure and promotion. And so if you were to talk about, well, our value system includes how has your work contributed to sustainability, a simple question like that, that could spark, you know, an avalanche, a snowball effort. And so I think that that's one way to do it as well.
I would add that I think, like I had mentioned a little bit, that this idea of change is hard, particularly in research, when you have something that you just got to work and you need to, like Anthony said, finish projects and grants and write papers, that it can be scary. I mean, one of the Green Labs initiatives is this, you know, drop your -80 temperature to -70. And everybody would be like, oh my God, I have, you know, 4 freezers full of stuff that's been that way forever. And I don't know how that's going to change things. And it can be a challenge to institute. We all know little things, you know, a little thing in an experiment can make the whole thing not work out. And so it is scary in some of these situations to make some of the changes. But I think the more people think about it, the more we talk and share ideas, like I said, the community that it builds, that will really help people, one, see that it's worked for others. That was one of the big reasons to get this started, is say, look, you can do it and nothing horrible has happened. I've really enjoyed the experience. It does take time to do it. And that's also where I think students can help in the process. So in getting things, the students definitely helped push me to keep getting stuff done, even though I had other things that I was doing, so that we could, it's really up to them, and credit to them that they got me to finish the process. And like I said, as much as I'm super committed to it, you know, that is a problem in terms of time. And finally, I wanted to mention another thing. The International Institute for Sustainable Laboratories was brought up. They have an initiative that I think is great. It's called Better Grants, which is actually trying to make it a part of grant applications to include what you're doing to do sustainable research. And I think things like that, including, you know, like the on-campus initiatives we have and the on-campus sustainability culture, things like that could really help push people to think more about what they're doing if they have to list on grant applications moving forward what they're, you know, what efforts they're taking to do more sustainable work.
And I would just build on that. Well, in one way, be a devil's advocate. Like, sustainability efforts should not just fall to individuals who opt in, right? We do need to hold, you know, large corporations or governing organizations accountable for this, right? So I think there's a lot to be learned from other movements that have identified that it shouldn't all just fall back to the individual, right? The person who works in the lab. So I think that we need probably some action across all of these levels. We do need to have a voice and talk about why this is important. But I just dropped in the chat the new Courageous Strategic Transformation document that was released yesterday. And if you read through that, it reads, CSU has made a very strong commitment in this space, and now is our time to operationalize that, right? So having a voice in that and an expectation and setting some standards, I think, is really important. But one thing I just wanted to bring up specific to the research area is what we've done about the use of animals in research. It's unfortunately relatively recent that we have all these standards for how we use animals in research. And, a lot of that push came from public and societal expectation about our humane use of animals. And a big, really important thing to drive home out of that is that efficient use of resources, whether they're a live animal or whether it is water and power and plastics, relates to good science. And I say that as an epidemiologist because if people are doing research that are really small numbers where you actually can't make a conclusion, the argument was made when they looked at lab animal use was that if you can't actually answer your scientific question, why are you using this many animals, right? So we really actually review scientific protocols for use of animals to say, does the design of that study actually have the power that justifies the use of those animals? I would argue that we should have a similar standard to some degree. This is sort of the bold statement of why are we not doing the same thing for sustainability, right? It's another type of resource. And I've used that example just as one that has been successful. People starting to ask this question, well, if we're doing research that isn't actually answering these questions, why are we doing that? There is a counter argument, which is there's an element of scientific discovery that does involve dabbling around. But as a general rule, I think we need not just the individuals making morally driven personal choices, right? We also need some upper level support on this. But anybody who's on this call and is interested, I think at least at CSU, we were just given a fairly strongly worded document that suggests we will make those changes here.
That's awesome to hear. I'll definitely have to check that out. So thank you for sharing that. Courageous transformation is what it's called, I believe, right? So kind of just to keep adding on that, we've talked a lot about research labs, but in our previous discussion before we met today, we talked a little bit about how there's other ways that are not completely research. So you have the ultra low freezer program, and shutting the sash is definitely just more of your lab type stuff. But it seemed like there's a couple other programs or policies out there, like the procurement policy, for example, that I think would be kind of nice thing to talk about right now, since we're talking about this whole, there's lots of people involved, right? At the level of research.
Yeah, and I think Stacey and I, right, we're both on that procurement discussion or whatever we call it group. Like we really talk about like paper. Like what is the biggest impact and what is our biggest use? And so think about the impact of a top-down approach that says we will only buy this type of paper and that we make it easy for you to do that. We've done something very similar with chemicals. If you order research chemicals at CSU, we've said you have to order them this way. So we do have the ability to do this. And at a procurement level, other things that are student driven, I'll give you a great example is we don't want things shipped to us with too much packaging. And I was at a meeting and I'm like, oh my God, have you ever seen like that little jar come to your lab and the box is like this big and it's filled with all of this non-recyclable plastic wrap? We have conversations of how can we ask the people we're ordering from to even reduce that? So yeah, great example.
Yeah, Julie, I was going to add, I didn't pull up the link right away, but so there is an environmentally and socially responsible procurement policy. And Anthony mentioned we're on a working group that's working on a current update to that. What's interesting about this policy is even though it's a big P policy and exists in the policy library and all that stuff that makes it look really official, it doesn't really have any teeth. And that's where everybody on this call comes into play. The current iteration of the policy allows you to make a choice for sustainability and tries to guide people towards sustainability decisions in their procurement, but it doesn't tell you specifically you need to buy X. And so right now, the onus is on each of us to do some of that analysis, I guess, to decide and to choose, am I going to make a greener procurement decision? I hope that when we finish the update, get the next iteration of the policy adopted, that it'll be a little stronger in the guidance and maybe we'll figure out a way to get some teeth, a little bit of at least some small teeth, at least so we can, nip at you a little bit. But it really comes down to all the decisions that anybody who's making purchasing decisions for their lab or for the university just stops to think, hey, do we need this can we buy something that's a greener option? Or if you just don't know what, if you think that there's an option out there and you don't know what it is, that's I guess when you reach out too, and we'll see if we can help you find the best product. I also want to add that the procurement side is super important, and we can all do better in our decisions, or try to do better, right? Buy with sustainability in mind. Another really interesting and important thing to think about is the end of life of that product. Now, it might be a chemical, or it might be something that just you've used up, or it does just go in the trash. But if you had a piece of equipment that you had for a previous project, a previous research, something, and it's this useful working piece of equipment, and you just have it crammed over in the corner of your lab, send it to surplus, right? If you send it to surplus property, one, you get some space in your lab, and two, someone else can buy it. Someone else can buy it and use it and put it to use. And so if you keep a piece of, you think about all of the energy and material that goes into building a piece of equipment or a computer or whatever it might be. If you're done with it, but it still has useful life, send it to surplus. Don't stick it in the corner for 10 years until it's completely obsolete and useless, and then just eventually is going to go in the landfill, right? That's kind of closing the loop of our thinking about the things that we buy, and then what we do with them when we're done with them. And you can buy stuff at surplus too. I see a nice comment. Yep, Julie, good for you. Maybe the piece of equipment you need is available at surplus. And I just think that's a really important part of the equation as well.
Yeah, I would just add that, back to the Green Labs and how this fits in there, going through the process, they bring up all kinds of ideas like this of, have you thought about how to do different things that might be ordering less or sharing, or again, building this community of people to reach out to? Do you have this so I can just use some and not buy, or use your equipment and share? I think it's, again, that education piece is so much. They also have the ACT labeling that they've been promoting to try to help you know better about and get companies to put labels onto what products include. And I don't know all the details, but the website has a lot of that on there. And then I would even say there are some companies I found that, again, it's still currently a kind of an onus on the individual, although Colleen's working, I think, to try to make this easier as well with some student input. But you can find companies that will ship you a cardboard container rather than a styrofoam container. And it may mean that you have to look a little bit, but there are some companies who are really responding to some of these interests and needs. And so the more we continue to try to support those efforts, I think that we'll see more coming down the pipeline.
So just looking at the time, I'm thinking, I want to kind of end the panel discussion with action items, things that people can do. I mean, you've talked about it throughout the panel discussion, but one question I have is, all of us sitting on this call are definitely, interested in the concept, right? So how can we help the four of you get the word out, right? Because I think we're kind of, am I right in thinking it's earlier days and not everyone knows about the programs, even though I know you're doing amazing work, but should we start having those infographics on our doors and just telling more people, what are kind of your suggestions?
So there's been a push in the safety world to say, oh, if you have a group meeting, you're going to have a safety moment. Well, maybe we need to push and say we need a sustainability moment in all of our group meetings, and it's for everybody to think about sustainability. And when I go through chemical inventories, my God, that is one area where, when Stacey was talking about end of life, you as a researcher, okay, you could buy, let's say, a gram of the thing you need for $10, but you can buy a kilogram for $15. We really need you to just buy what you need. But we're historical as researchers and PIs, as hoarders. And so one of the things you can do is really contact Stacey and I to come check out your lab or your research space or whatever it is, because some people think, oh, I can't do this. If you're running a bunch of supercomputers, we can talk about energy, right? If you're doing research with animals, we can talk about that. We can talk about research with chemicals. And so I think what you all can do is contact us, let us see what we can do, and also spread the word inside your domains, and make it a normal thing to ask about, rather than like, oh, we don't have time for sustainability. No, be the person that stands up and says, wait, this is part of our courageous strategic transformation, and there's money in this. That's the other thing that a lot of people were, oh, what does it cost? We will find money. And it's just like we're finding money in diversity, equity, and inclusion grants. We're finding money in grants that include sustainability as well.
So where do you all see this program in the next 5 years? What would be some of your goals?
Wouldn't it be nice if
That
every
it's
lab at
part-
CSU was a Green Lab certified lab? I just want to build on Anthony's point, though. I think your voice is really important. Like, whether you are doing this yourself in your own lab, that is amazing, being a Green Lab champion. But now is the time to literally drop in all of those comment boxes about the courageous strategic transformation, put your hand up in a lecture and say, oh, this is great work. I really enjoyed your talk. By the way, are you a Green Lab certified lab? I mean, the more we just talk about this all the time and normalize the expectation of sustainability in science, the faster it is that we're going to make any type of change. So much like that's sort of the free stuff you can do, is to talk about it all the time if you can't necessarily do it within your own physical space, or maybe you're not working in a lab yourself right now. So just building on his point, I think there's lots of places to have a voice. And I agree, right now is a time that people are listening to ideas. I was in a meeting today where it's really helpful if I can very quickly look up the data on how many students said this exact same thing, how many times somebody has put this comment in the comment box or whatever. That's the type of thing that helps to, slowly move the big ship in a different direction. But without that feedback, it's pretty hard for a handful of people to try to say, yes, we care about this, right? So I would just reiterate the importance of having a voice.
I'll just add that I think that, right now, right, I'm just that guy that works in facilities, and I know this is important, and I know for lots of different reasons, and there's lots of great questions that come out, and it is often the students. They do have that expectation that we're doing things a certain way, and when we're not meeting their expectation, then they ask. And I can't remember who said it on here, but if we can empower people to ask those questions and make space for those conversations to happen, then I think there's lots and lots of ways that we can advance sustainability and safety and green labs at the institution, by just making that space where we say, we're open to that, because in fact, it is probably how we should be practicing. It's good for everybody involved, and it actually adds value to our lab and to our experience and to our students' futures, and the jobs that they're going to have when they leave here. So we don't have right now, we don't have a big budget, or really any budget. we don't have a full-blown Green Labs program or office. If you start clicking around, you'll find a number of universities around the country that do have a Green Labs coordinator or a Green Labs office. I don't know if that's where we'll end up or where we should go, because we can do it in that really official way, but we can also do it in that really organic way of just doing it together. And even on this call, there's already 5 people that I know that are Green Lab ambassadors. And I think if we get more and more folks that our Green Lab ambassadors, and we just work together and talk together, we can make a lot of progress even before we have, you know, a big official office or more staff, even though that would be nice.
I would just add, if anybody has questions, I'm 100% willing to help or talk through more of the details of the process. If there are students who are interested, definitely send them to any of our way, because we're always trying to get the students involved in helping push forward the sustainability efforts. So definitely reach out to, I'm sure, any of us, but like I said, I'm very happy to help or direct in any way I can.
Is there any other things that maybe we haven't had a chance to talk about that any of the panelists would like to add?
Yeah, you know, we touched on it kind of adjacent, is we talk about the career of a researcher and sustainability. If we can put you in a more sustainable environment that 99.999% of times leads to a more safe environment, then the researcher can have a longer career. If we think about, you know, the ergonomics of some of the research we do, if we were able to limit how much we do, we would have less of an impact on our body. If we were able to replace a chemical hazard with something that's water soluble and it's less volatile, you know, we have made a positive impact on that researcher right there at that point of target research level. And I think that we really need to think about the pipeline of researchers and how sustainability is really helping us to expand and incorporate that pipeline of researchers, rather than just saying, this is the way science has always been done. It's hard. We have no empathy for you. We're changing all of that and saying that science is a space where, yeah, we do have empathy and we care downstream, you know, what our impact is. If you cure cancer, but your waste causes cancer in a community in another state, like what impact did you do? Or if you use too many animals and now there's an ergonomic breakdown in your research staff, you know, that was on you to not use that many animal models. And so there are ways that we can really look at it and say, from that point of view of the researcher, this impact is positive in ways that we haven't even thought about as well.
This has just been so eye-opening. I want to give a chance if there's anyone in the audience that would like to just unmute and ask a question, or type in the chat. I know we've done a little bit of that. Well, Stacey, I would be interested in seeing if we could get a discount on the certification of the Green Lab. That'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we made it entirely 100% clear, but my Green Lab is a nonprofit organization, right? They're not, it's an outside organization, and they developed this tool and this assessment, and that's why there's a fee. And so when we sign up a lab, when we signed up our group of labs, 12 labs, I was able to help pay for that with money from facilities. And then it was only $175 per lab. I think the cost went up a little bit since then in general, but still, because what we're paying for then is we're paying for that expertise of their analysis, who have looked at hundreds and hundreds of labs across the world. But this is also the intention, the question of the pilot, that once we get labs through this process, maybe we have that conversation of, do we want to develop our own tool, or do we want to use a third-party tool? I think there's lots of pros and cons to both sides of that, and I don't know the answer even myself yet. But you know, it is that's what the current model looks like. And I think too, the other way we could look at it is one of the labs participating, they decided to use, they incorporated all the labs on one floor of their building. So even though there's multiple PIs, because they have a bunch of shared lab equipment and space, we're going to certify that whole floor of that building as one lab for the same $175 that maybe another lab was, you know, one room with 2 people or something, you know.
Right.
So we have a lot of variety in that way, but we can get creative, I guess is my point. And
Sounds good.
Yeah, so you know, one of the things that people are like, oh, good, you're in safety and sustainability, but you cost me money. I
Right.
I think a great grant to write, and one of the easiest grants to write is actually the CSU Sustainability Fund. If you were to say, look, in my department, I want to sign up 10 labs, I want $3,500 from the CSU Sustainability Fund, which the next round, you know, is going to open up sometime this year. And we have a very high rate of funding, by the way. You know, you were to apply for that. That's a great way to get it started, because this sustainability fund also seeds little things that go on to be bigger projects. One of them being literally reseeding the mountain campus. So these projects are highly impactful. And I really think anyone on this call, if you were to go to, you know, that link for the Sustainability Fund and apply for 10 labs, I think that's something that's very doable and we can support you in.
That is a fantastic idea for sure. Yeah.
and until then, it remains free to ask a question,
Right.
to start the conversation, right? And any one person can do that. Any one person can do that. And that's really, really important.
Yeah, I think that if you were to summarize this whole panel, I think this idea of empowering each other, giving each other a voice, if this is something that you're passionate about, or even just sort of passionate about, you can actually make a huge difference by just turning off a machine on the weekend even. So yeah, I think we've given a lot of people a lot of ideas. I was going to throw out one idea that I've done in my lab, is literally we just put recycling trash cans in all the different lab rooms, which we didn't have that before. And it's so funny, I'll walk into the lab and everyone's like, can I recycle this? You know, like, which is just, it's kind of cool to see that happen. And before, but I've worked all across the world actually, and never had recycling bins in my lab. So this is, I mean, just that simple thing and that's free, right? You can just ask a custodian for a recycling bin and then you'll have one in the lab. So there's a lot I think we can all do.
And Julie, I think you emphasize it, then it brings up a conversation, right? And it may be that, like I said, you can't recycle everything. And that's a part of the conversation too, that right now we can't, but maybe then somebody with engineering ideas comes up with another idea of how we could make something that could be recyclable that would serve the same purpose. But like I said, I think that that's the most important, is you make small changes and it opens up conversation to, you know, what can we do better?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, I have definitely learned a lot, and it seems like from the chat, a lot of people have too. If there's no more questions, we can just in the panel discussion, but I just want to say thank you to all of you for one, having this be something that you work on and think about day to day. I think is huge, right? So I appreciate each one and all of you, because I think if we have kind of you are an ambassador for the programs that maybe someone like me can use and my students can use. And I think that's pretty powerful in itself. So thank you so much. And really just thank you for taking the time to be here this evening with all of us. Maybe one day in a couple years, you can come back. Maybe we'll all be in person with some food and wine, which would be really good. So that's how we used to do these things. But Okay, well, thank you all, and I'll stay online if anyone wants to has any other questions or anything. Thank you.
Thanks,
for having
Julie.
us.